Hi, I'm Jenny from Jenny Wren's Nest, and this is the This Ain't a Scene sweater. Today I'm going to show you the Italian bind-off, which is used for the collar, the hem and the cuffs. This is the collar that I finished working now, so I'm just going to talk you through exactly how you do the Italian bind-off. So the first step is getting the right amount of yarn. It's generally about 4 times the length of the amount that you're binding off. So if I wrap it once around the collar there like this, that's 1, 2, 4, and then I will cut just past 4 just to be safe. And then you need to thread your yarn needle. So what you can do when you thread your yarn needle, because it's quite a lot of yarn, is bring it all the way so that your tail is almost as long, and then you can just keep pulling on that. So when you've used up this much, just pull it back again and keep going. It just stops it getting in the way. Some people will double up again. So I've already got double here. Some people will double it again. I don't generally bother with that, but that's a method that could work. So the first step for your Italian bind-off is to have a look at how your ribbing works. So my first stitch in ribbing is my knit stitch, and I'm going to go into this stitch purlwise with my yarn needle and pull the yarn all the way through so it's connected to that last stitch at the end of the last round. I'm not going to take this stitch off the needle yet. I'm going to look at the second stitch on my needle, which is a purl stitch, and I'm going to go knitwise through to the back of that stitch. And then I'm going to pull my yarn again all the way through. Then I'm going to go back to my first stitch and I'm going to go knitwise into that one as well. Pull the yarn all the way through. And then this time I'm going to slip that first stitch off. So now our stitches are purl at the front, and then the second stitch is a knit stitch. So what you're going to do now is slip your yarn needle purlwise into the second stitch and pull the yarn all the way through. And then slip the needle purlwise into the first stitch and pull the yarn through. Don't pull it too tight because we want a nice loose bind off. You're going to slip that first stitch off, and now we're back to having a knit stitch at the front. So now we're going to go between the first and the second stitch from the back. So I'm not going into either of the stitches. I am going between the 2 stitches back to front and pulling my yarn through. That's just to get the yarn to the right side of the stitches. And then I'm going to go into my second stitch knitwise. So this time we are going into the stitch, not between any. Pulling my yarn all the way through, and then we're back to knitwise for the first stitch, pull my yarn through and slip the stitch off. So it's a repeat pretty much of those steps. So if you have a purl stitch at the front, you're going to purl into the second stitch and then purl into the first stitch and slip the first stitch off. If you have a knit stitch at the front, you're going to pass your needle between the 2 stitches, slip your needle knitwise into the second stitch, and then slip your needle knitwise into the first stitch and pass that stitch off. So one more time, if your first stitch is a purl, you go into the second stitch purlwise, pull your yarn through, go into the first stitch purlwise, pull your yarn through and slip the first stitch off. If your first stitch is a knit stitch, you're going to go between the 2 stitches to bring your yarn to the front of the work. Then you're going to go knitwise into the second stitch, knitwise into the first stitch and slip that stitch off. And you're just going to carry on this pattern all the way around the entirety of the ribbing that you are working to bind off. And then when you get to the beginning, I will show you exactly what you need to do next. And now we're on the last 2 stitches. So this first one is a knit stitch. So we're going to do what we did before, which is between the 2 stitches on the needle, knitwise into the second stitch, knitwise into the first stitch, slip that first stitch off, and then we're left with just this purl stitch on the needle, and I'm going to find the first knit stitch that I bound off here, purlwise into there, purlwise into the stitch on my needle and slip it off, pull my yarn through, and then I am just going to sew down the end of the yarn. And I'm not going to pull it massively tight because otherwise it'll end up sort of dipping in and then you won't get that nice smooth line where you can't really tell where the beginning is. I am going to just weave my ends in instead. And there we have the Italian bind off. It's quite a nice stretchy but relatively firm bind off. It looks really neat. Slightly less so on this particular yarn just because it's a bit fuzzier. But it's probably my favourite bind off. A lot of people will say, oh, it takes too long and it's a bit too much effort. I really like it. I find it therapeutic. That probably sounds quite sad, but I quite like just sitting with the TV on and just working my way through all the stitches. The collar's not got that many anyway, so it's not going to take you that long. I did also do the Italian bind off on the hem as well, and I'll be doing it on the cuffs of the This Ain't a Scene sweater.